All right, so those are two arenas. We've talked about invention, we've talked about arrangement. Where we want to spend the rest of our time today is on style. All right, style is defined pretty straightforward. It just means picking the best expressions or phrases that will help move your audience toward that telos, that thesis. Okay, so it's basically selecting the best expressions and phrases that will help move a specific audience toward the telos of the artifact. That's the definition of style in a nutshell. Now, when we as critics approach style, we're looking at one of four things, and really the fourth one is the most important to us unless something has really gone wrong. Basically, the first three of these virtues of style, we call them, the first three are pretty straightforward, and if the rhetor is doing them right, that we don't pay a whole lot of attention to them. We only pay attention to them if something went wrong inside the process. But we want to look at all four, and we're going to go through these relatively quickly. Correctness, it's exactly what it sounds like. Do they say they are instead of they is? You know, is it just, now obviously grammatical norms will vary from place to place and from some cultures to other cultures and subcultures to subcultures. But for the most part, there's a fairly standard, if somebody is writing out there to the whole of a very large, diverse crowd, there's a standard kind of grammar that we expect them to use. Is it there? If it is, then bully for them. If it's not, why? So you would look for things that didn't fit the correctness definition, right? Things that were grammatically odd or peculiar. That should raise a flag. You should call your attention. That should call your attention, and you should, as a critic, look at that more carefully. Clarity is the second of the four virtues of style. Clarity is the king of style. Everything about clarity is what matters most. All right, so the idea in clarity is to construct a complete, full, understandable set of ideas, and everything has to be sacrificed to clarity. Essentially, we ask, okay, has the rhetor made the goal understandable? Okay, does the rhetor have the goal down? Do they do you as an audience member get what they want? Are they clear about the telos? That's the first thing. The second thing is, have the main points given clear reasons to embrace the telos. So what's the relationship? So when they say, hey, you need to be supporting the national parks, and why do you need to be supporting the national parks? And then if I get a description about how valuable and important it is to have a balanced economy in my state, I'm kind of scratching my head. I'm saying, I don't guess I see the connection here. What's the connection between me having a balanced budget in the state and me supporting the national parks? Okay, that needs to be made clear. Clarity is the gem, the crown jewel of style. If style is done correctly, things will be clear, okay? Then I want to very quickly, very briefly, call your attention to one other aspect of clarity that's really important for you as a critic, and that is this idea of transitions, okay? Transitions essentially map out how the ideas inside a document, inside an artifact, are related to each other. And you as a critic want to pay special attention to those transitions. Transitions can get kind of dodgy, okay? But they'll be very, very revelatory. I want to take you just on a quick little digression and look at a couple of just a few out of many, just a few really quick examples here. So when I say the rat ate the cheese and died, okay, we got some information, but not a lot of information here. We know that there is a rat. We know, of course, that there is eating. So there's a rat, an eating, and then finally, of course, there's the dying, right? That's it. That's all we know. The relationship between them isn't really established. We're filling in the gaps if we think there's some kind of a relationship there. On the other hand, the rat ate the cheese and thus died. Now, all of a sudden, I've got a cause and an effect. And it changes everything. Just that little word, thus, makes the relationships between the eating, the rat, and the dying perfectly clear. Okay, I know that the reason the rat died was because it ate the cheese. Okay. On the other hand, just change that thus to but. The rat ate the cheese, but he died. Do you hear the difference between those? The rat ate the cheese and thus died. And the rat ate the cheese, but he died. Okay, this tells a story. That little but puts us in mind of the idea that the cheese was supposed to help the rat. He was supposed to eat the cheese and then be okay. Yeah, but things didn't work out that way. So that little transitional word there changes how you think, how you feel, how you experience the style, the word choices that have been made here. Though the rat ate the cheese, he nevertheless died anyway. Hey, that's exactly the same sentence that we just read. The only difference here is in this though, nevertheless, anyway, this is somebody who really, really wants you to notice that the cheese was supposed to save him. Though the rat ate the cheese, he nevertheless died anyway. Okay, that's a story that says this was supposed to not happen. The cheese was supposed to save the rat, and it didn't work out that way. All right, that's, I call your attention to this because I want you to see these little phrases, these little words will set you up for very different kinds of expectations, right? If he had eaten the cheese, the rat would not have died. And, you can compare, if he had not eaten the cheese, the rat would have died. Okay, you get the idea. I don't want to belabor the point here, okay? The simple truth is you as a critic need to pay really careful attention to the small words too. Okay, just those little words matter. They matter a great deal. So keep a close eye on the transitions. That may, and it may not, again, it may not, but that may be a source where you're going to find some really good information with regard to rhetorical devices. Okay, propriety, a third element or the third virtue of style. Basically, in propriety, we're simply asking, is the kind of talk that's going on here appropriate for the occasion, for the audience, for the topic, right? Sometimes, if you're raised where I was in the Appalachian Hills, then somebody who's running for city council could very easily stand up and say, well, there ain't no way we're going to allow them city slickers to come in here and buy our farms out. Okay. Now you can talk that way in Appalachia up in the hills, right? That's not the kind of way, though, we would talk if we were, say, running for president, right? There's a different sort of sense of propriety. So propriety will shift and it will change, but it needs to be proper and appropriate for the topic that's being discussed. Serious topics should be discussed seriously. Frivolous topics should be discussed frivolously. So it's got to match the topic. Does the style of your artifact match its topic? Does the style of the artifact match the audience that's listening, right? Those are the three simple, direct kind of virtues of style: correctness, clarity, and propriety. But they are not the only ones. The fourth one is the really big one, and that's the one we want to focus on. And ornamentation is essentially the process of putting together a little bit of a zing in your presentation. So there will be places in the artifacts, all the artifacts you have, there will be places in those artifacts that will be a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a sudden pullback, or a push forward suddenly in the language. And you get craft. Now it's crafted, but it's not eccentric. It's not weird. Okay. You want to, when we're talking about correctness, you're not supposed to notice, right? You don't notice when someone speaks correctly. You only notice when they speak incorrectly. If someone's being clear, you don't get crazy about that. If they're doing, if they're speaking appropriately for the situation and occasions, that doesn't bother you. Ornamentation is the one place in style where we get something that we notice a little bit. Now, here's the most famous, probably in the last 150 years, stylistic example, and it comes from an inaugural address by John Kennedy when he was elected president back in 63, or 60 rather. And he says this: ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Okay, so that's a pretty clear, typical sense of something happening there. You can feel, you can sense the craft in that experience, right? That said, this is a device that's very specific. It's not a general feeling of craft. This is called antimetabole, okay? And antimetabole, your textbook, I think, uses the term antithesis. Antimetabole, or antithesis, is simply a process where you reverse ideas. You start with an A, B, C, and then you go to A, C, B. And it's that reversal of ideas that creates a certain kind of effect. So we have a name for that device, and we have literally hundreds of devices that have weird Greek names like that, okay? Because the Greeks made long, long lists of these devices and how they worked and what they accomplished, okay? It's one of the things they did with their lives in rhetoric. So literally, I'm telling you, there are hundreds of those devices. Okay, in this particular case, you can see what's happening here. You ask country for you, ask you for country. You feel, you can sense that reversal that's going on there. Here's another example of the same kind of antimetabole, of reversal. This is from Samuel Johnson. Integrity without knowledge is weak and useless, and knowledge without integrity is dangerous and dreadful. Okay, do you see it? Integrity, knowledge, knowledge, integrity. There it is. It's that reversal. Now, what does reversing that do? Well, it does a number of things. One thing it does is it creates a sense of progression, a sense of things being negotiable, that there's a possibility here. So by mixing the word order, we create for you a sense that you have a choice in this matter. So one of the ways that antimetabole works is to raise up in you a sense that you can do something here. You have power to make a choice. There's the example. That's antimetabole right there, and you can see the integrity swaps out with the knowledge, and there it is. But we're not done yet, okay? This device also carries something called juxtaposition. It's another stylistic device. Juxtaposition is when we line up things, usually in a sequence. We get an ABC followed by a 1, 2, 3, and we get that A1, B2, C3. They somehow are linked up or matched up in the way the discourse is structured. And what that does for us is it creates a sense that there is something weighted and common, or there's they're pulling against each other. In this case, weak and useless, dangerous and dreadful, these are all part and parcel of the same thing. So what we're getting here is juxtaposing very, very weak, terrible ideas. Now, what are those weak and terrible ideas? They're all grouped up there together. Well, if we look carefully one more time, it's very clear this is a statement that expects integrity and knowledge to come together. It expects those two to be linked up. You need both. So the expectation is we're linking up integrity and knowledge on one side. And what is that integrity and knowledge? What's the link of integrity and knowledge being juxtaposed against? Oh, weakness, dreadful things, useless things, dangerous things. How do you avoid all those terrible, weak, dangerous, useless, dreadful things? By having a world where you are able to combine integrity and knowledge. That's how you do it. Okay, now that's a lot of stylistic stuff going on in there, all right? That's huge. There's no, you could spend 2 more days just unpacking the stylistic power of that kind of a phrase. As I said, we got literally hundreds of those sorts of stylistic devices that are out there. Obviously, you can dip into any of them that you wish. We've talked about two, antimetabole and juxtaposition. Here's some that your book talks about as well. Alliteration, that's another stylistic device that you might pick up. Alliteration is where you get the same sound that is repeated over and over again. And it tends to usually do a couple of things. Alliteration creates a sense of inevitability, a sort of destiny, a feel of necessity. That tends to be the result of alliteration. Another one, imagery. Sometimes your rhetor will just spend a long time painting a picture for you, or creating some kind of experience of sound or smell or feeling. They're going to do that. That imagery helps prime you. It helps awaken you so that a pathetic appeal that might come later will be more powerful. So imagery is a very, very powerful stylistic device. These are not things you can absolutely pull apart from each other. And you're absolutely correct to identify the fact that, hey, if you've got a stylistic device and it's priming you for a pathetic appeal, isn't that happening somewhere in an arrangement? Do we draw all of that together? The short answer is, well, if you're very, very bold, you can try that. And I'm not going to say no. I just want you to understand that usually when you start trying to draw together and synthesize two or three different things, a rhetorical device of enthymeme, so an ethical appeal, situated in a certain point in the arrangement of the speech, leading to or set up by imagery or personification. I mean, that gets really complicated. That's a lot of balls to keep in the air and juggle through in terms of getting the paper done. Can you do that? Sure. You can absolutely say, I want to talk about how this enthymeme happening at this point in the arrangement set up a very strong imagery, set up a very strong appeal where a stylistic device of imagery was especially powerful. Yes, you absolutely can do that. Go for it. On the other hand, hold in mind that you got to keep all of these up in the air. You got to explain all of them. You got to define all of them. You got to discuss how each one is operating with the other two, right? So it gets complicated in a hurry. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be done. And I do not want to say that you should not do it. But it doesn't have to be done that way either. You can say, I'm going to look at 3 enthymematic appeals, or I'm going to look at the way 2 ideas were juxtaposed against each other and how that related to personification. Okay, so we can pick 2 stylistic devices here and talk about how they're related to each other. You might simply say, I have 3 examples of personification in here, and I want to look at each of those 3 and talk about how personification is functioning in each of those moments to move the audience toward the thesis. Okay. So you can do anything across that spectrum. You can pick, my guess is that for the length you're working with, most of you are going to work with 2, maybe 3 examples of rhetorical devices. Probably most of you are going to have one kind of rhetorical device. You're going to pick 3 different enthymemes you're going to look at, or you're going to pick 2 different stylistic devices and 1 enthymeme, or you're going to talk about 2 enthymemes in terms of how things are arranged. Probably that's the kind of paper most of you are going to write. So you're going to be dealing with 2, maybe 3 most rhetorical devices. Don't overdo that. Don't go past that, certainly. But should you draw comparisons? You certainly can. Those tend to be really strong papers. Here's one of the things to remember as you set out to do your analysis. One of the things you want to remember is your analysis needs to have a sense of coherence. It's got to hang together itself. In other words, if you just give me 3 random logical appeals, but we never talk about how those logical appeals are related to each other or to anything else, then I basically got 3 small bits of information. I need you to draw it together. So I need some kind of synthesis there, some kind of way where you tell me how things are related to each other. But I don't want you to make it too complicated. All right? Don't get 5 things going here. You just won't have space to untangle that knot, right? They will get knotted up and you won't have the space to get them pulled apart. Yeah, I'm talking about the number of devices you're working with. So if you give me 3 pathetic appeals, we've got 3 pathetic appeals. That's fine. Okay, that's perfectly fine. But just make sure I don't get 3 separate pathetic appeals that have nothing to do with each other.
Okay.
Right? Draw me into some sense of of how these work together. Okay, and if it's 3 pathetic appeals, that's fine. I just want to know how those 3 pathetic appeals are kind of helping each other along, as well as moving the audience to the thesis, the tell-us. Good question. Other questions? All right, so let's wrap this up with style. Okay. Okay, so we're basically saying, look, there's a bunch of different stylistic devices out there, right? Where do you go to talk about this stuff? Where can you find them? I want to refer you to a web page. It's called Rhetorica Silvae. If you just Google up Rhetorica Silvae, Silvae, it'll take you to it because there's only one of them. And as I say, I'll post these slides and you'll be able to read the website itself. It's basically rhetoric.byu, Brigham Young University .edu. That's where you'll find the Rhetorica Silvae. There you will find a list of literally dozens and dozens of these kinds of rhetorical devices. Now, don't necessarily go out there trying to fish around and find the perfect device that has the name that you're looking for. Okay, if you spot something, if you see a pattern, just simply tell us what that pattern is and tell us how you think a pattern like that works. That's legitimate. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so you don't have to go out and figure out that what you're looking at is antimetaboly or litosis or antherion. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to find the perfect Greek or Latin name for this thing. It's not a scavenger hunt. Okay, that's not what I'm after. What I'm after is for you to see that there are certain turns of phrases, or that there are certain kinds of logical appeals, or that there are certain, but especially in style, these turns of phrases. You can simply say, I'm interested in 3 different examples of word choice. Because they are all word choices. And then you say, tell me what's the difference between choosing one word and another. So spend time talking about how there are differences in the way you can pick different words. And there are very big differences, right? There are certain words that you don't get to use in English, not in proper public English, without some ramifications. And yet there are perfectly normal, happy medical terms you can use for exactly the same things. So, it's, if you say puke, that's a word that has a kind of an edge to it. And if you say regurgitate, that's a word that has a very different feeling to it. Okay, now you understand both puke and regurgitate are referring to exactly the same event. It doesn't feel any different at all to the person who's doing it. But your audience will feel very differently about you and your topic depending on which word you pick, right? So word choice, it's perfectly legitimate generic title. So you are more than free to simply say, I'm interested in stylistic devices. I am going to concentrate on word choice. And I see these three things happening in the word choices this writer has made. That's perfectly fair. But if you want to look at some of the kinds of things that are out there, Rhetorica Silvae is a great place to go. Now, I'll give you a full warning. Rhetorica Silvae, I don't think they've updated it in 12 years, okay? So it's an old, cranky place. But if you just go in and you click on that list of names that you'll see over on the right, you'll recognize them. They're all like antimetabile. They're all these impossible to pronounce Greek words. Just click on them, and they'll give you, here are the kinds of things that you look for in rhetorical devices. Now, another place you can go, oh my gosh, you have a textbook, chapter 9. It's got like 5 pages of stylistic devices in it that are, dealt with exactly like what we're talking about. They name the device, and then they tell you about the device. They define it, and they tell you how it generally works. Okay, so that's a great place to go. There's another book that's out there, The Handlist of Rhetorical Terms by Lanham. I think actually you can get some PDFs of this online for free. But again, don't spend a whole lot of time. And Lanham's rhetorical terms cover everything, not just style. So, you'd have to pick it up and be a little careful and make sure you're picking stylistic terms in there. But if you wanted to read up on those would be, I would say, 3 places you might go and poke around a little bit to get a sense of what it is, where you would want to go to find these stylistic devices. So a rhetorical device is an artistic or crafted use of language by a rhetor to move an audience toward the telos or purpose of the rhetorical artifact. Now, we said at the beginning, the rhetor makes artistic choices, that is, they choose to craft their language in 5 specific areas, and we've looked at 3 of those areas today. We've looked at invention, we've looked at arrangement, we've looked at style. I want to close out literally by just giving you a couple of words on the last 2. Delivery, in this day and age, unless you're looking at a live delivery, like you're watching the performance at the presidential debates, where the 2 candidates are up there and they are speaking from prepared notes, of course, from memorized spots, of course, but also off the cuff, because questions are designed to throw them off a little bit. There you can focus on delivery. Delivery generally comes, we talk about physical delivery, okay, physical delivery. We talk about vocal delivery. Those are the 2 arenas. But when you're looking at a written text like you're dealing with, so artifacts that you that you have in front of you that are written down, there we think in terms of the media, where it appeared, and so forth. It's not for the level of criticism we're doing. The media delivery is not a fruitful area for you to go poking around. So you're almost certainly going to have nothing valuable that will come out of delivery. Now, we can do very, very valuable studies on delivery. I don't want you to get the idea that delivery is irrelevant. It's not. It's very powerful. When we talk about the way, for example, messages are framed in social media versus the way messages are framed in marginal media, versus the way they're framed in mainstream media. Okay, so there, the delivery can be incredibly powerful research, but not for the kind of artifact you're dealing with under the circumstances we have here. So probably delivery is not something you need to worry about. I want you to know it's there, but it's probably not gonna be a place you go. The same thing is true of memory. Memory essentially is questions, and it's rooted deeply in psychology. It's questions about how messages get internalized. And so here we work with group identity, and we work with a lot of other things in the contemporary vision of memory. But it's not the kind of place where, with the kind of artifact you've got and the sort of analysis you're doing, memory is probably not going to be particularly valuable to you here. Memory is very much about cultural structure and cultural identity. So there we are. Basically, that's what we do here. That's the pattern you follow right now. You're going to go out and you're going to analyze. You're going to name the rhetorical device and tell how it functions, tell how that function is present in your specific artifact, and suggest, there it is again, just hint, suggest how that presence nudges the audience forward. That's analysis with the classical method, okay? So there's the basic intro for you. Go out, find yourself some rhetorical devices. And when you get those rhetorical devices going, define them. Talk about how they work, what they do. Then show them doing that in your artifact and just suggest how that helps the audience get to the thesis. Okay, closing questions.